Alright, welcome back to the second video of week 9 of Computers in the Studio. In the previous video, we went over the workspace of After Effects. In this coming video, we will be speaking about importing options into After Effects. So, as stated with After Effects, it can use a ton of different media types. It can use images, it can use audio, it can use Photoshop, Illustrator files, PDFs. You can kind of really load a lot of different things into After Effects. And so we'll be going over specifically how to import Illustrator and Photoshop files. And so if you look at your workspace right here, there are a couple of different ways you can actually load in your project files. So one of which is you can double click and you'll see that now you'll get this kind of window that opens up, right? And so this window is just kind of one of the ways in which you can import the files. So make sure you download these files off of Canvas. Click on both of them, or click on one of them actually. We'll do one of them at a time and hit open. So now you'll see is that you have this window, right? And this window will kind of tell you the different ways in which you can then import these files into After Effects. So one of which is called footage. And so footage, as you can see, layer options will basically create one solid object out of the Photoshop file that you're kind of loading in. Similarly to how flatten layers kind of combines everything into one layer, you will get one layer out of footage. And then you can choose that specific layer that you want to bring. You can also, After Effects can keep layer styles and kind of have them editable. And then you can from there choose whether you want to keep it to the document size, so the larger size of the actual Photoshop file, or the layer size, so just creating a bounding box around the actual layer itself. And then you also have composition. So with composition, again, this will, instead of creating the footage, it will create a larger composition out of everything that you're loading in. And with this, you will actually see and be able to edit all the different layers within the file itself. And so, for example, let's just do this, for example, with editable layer styles, hit OK, and click cancel on that. And so now what you'll see is, you'll see a composition that's been created. And so whenever you see this kind of like little symbol that looks like it has a circle, a triangle, and a square, that's a composition. And then the actual files themselves. So if I double click on PSD import, you'll see that now it's opened up the file itself into my composition window. So I can view it here. It's kind of loaded in kind of the information for all of these things. And then along the bottom, you'll see that now my layers and my timeline have been populated. So when I click on this and then I drag, what you'll see is I'm dragging kind of the topmost layer, right? And so then if I try and click on, say, this red flower over here, I actually can't click on it. It won't actually go. Another thing to note here is if you double click on any of these, you'll see that now they open up into their own separate windows and they'll have kind of this black background going on here. Don't freak out. You've just kind of, similarly to how with Photoshop when you had smart objects and you double clicked on them and then you kind of opened up the smart object itself, you're kind of just double clicking and opening up the layer in a whole new window. So if you look along the top here, you'll see that coming back here, you'll get back to your larger composition, and then here you just have the actual shape itself. But so you'll see that this entire shape is kind of the size of the composition as a whole. And so that's kind of what the first composition import does, is if you look at any of these really, you'll see that they're all kind of as big as the actual document size. So I'm trying to click under to get to any of these other ones, and they're not really working out because, you know, this file is both, this explosion is both on top and it kind of is covering everything else. So let's delete all of this, right? And what if I just wanted to maybe get the layer by itself? What you would do is, I'm going to show you a different way to import. You can just drag it in like this. It'll import as well. And now, instead of clicking on composition, what you're going to do is click composition, retain layer styles. And you want to keep your editable layer styles on and don't merge them into footage. And now if you hit OK, you'll see again that the composition has been created, the layers have been added, and if I double click on this, you'll see that now instead of the layers kind of taking over the entirety of the composition, all of these are like properly within their own little layer boxes. So this is really useful now. We can now drag and move this, and it won't interfere with anything else. Similarly, you get PSD import layers, and this is all of the files that were in that Photoshop file as just separate layers themselves. And so you want to make sure both with Illustrator and Photoshop files when you're importing these that if they're all objects should have their own separate layers. Otherwise, if these two are part of the same layer, when you import it into AfterEffects, they will be treated as being together when you really want them to be separate. So definitely be mindful of that. I don't think it's as big of an issue in Photoshop just because generally things tend to be their own layers in Photoshop, but this is extremely important with Illustrator files. So with Illustrator files, it's kind of a little bit more straightforward. You just kind of drag them in, and you'll see similarly, if you want footage or composition, do composition. Do you want them to be at layer document size? Generally, we want it at layer size, and hit OK. And so now if I double click on this, you'll see that I have a composition here of my Illustrator file. And be sure to open these Illustrator and Photoshop files prior to, working with them right here, or open them right now even. Pause the video and just look at them, and you'll see how I've set them up in the Photoshop and in the Illustrator file to make sure that all of these are separate items. Okay? So when you come over here to your project folder window, you'll see that they're kind of layered separately like this. You can hit on type up and it'll reorder them. It'll reorder them by their actual folder type as opposed to name. That might be the best way to do it, just so that you have composition, folders, materials, all kind of set up in a organizable and readable way. If you want to rename anything in here, you cannot double click. Don't double click thinking that you'll be able to rename. At this point, you'll probably just open up the folder, or you may import something. If you need to rename anything, hit enter, and then rename it whatever you need to rename it. I, at this point, don't need to rename anything, so I will just keep it as it is. The other thing you might notice is that this background appears to be black, correct? So this background color is actually not black. It is just being filled with black as part of the composition setup, but it is actually transparent. And so if you want to see whether something is transparent or not, you can come down to this very area here and hit toggle transparency. And you'll see that now this is actually a transparent background, but there's nothing really there. Versus say, PSD import, if I hit the same thing, you'll see that it actually has a solid background. And the reason for that is because there's an actual shape here, but I can move this shape, and then behind it you'll see that there's actually the transparent background. So with this, the other thing to note is that you might notice that your rendering of your composition is coming out a little blurry. Part of that has to do again with what I was talking about, the composition settings here along at the bottom. And so you'll see that right here, there's a thing called that maybe says a third or has some sort of other word here. So this decides the resolution at which this is being loaded in. The reason for this is just because a lot of kind of rendering programs, and again, this was, if you remember in InDesign, this was also kind of a similar thing. A lot of rendering programs can use a lot of processing power, and you're kind of constantly having to edit and just replay and relook at these things. And so to load it at its full resolution every time can take up a lot of processing power and kind of slow down the program as a whole. And so often you might run it at half. You could run it at auto, and so this will, as you move in and out, kind of change the resolution at which it's being loaded at, as opposed to constantly being, let's say, half or a third. So choose whichever one you want. Please take into account your own computer's properties, and just make sure that that whatever you use, it's not slowing down your computer a whole lot. So from this, what we're now going to do is I'm going to create a new composition, and the way that I'm going to do that is hit create new composition, and you'll see that now and create composition is along the very bottom of the project folder. It's right here. And now you'll see that there's a series of composition settings. And so we're going to call this double layering. And then with that, you'll now see that there are some basic settings here. What you want to choose is HD TV 1080. The 1080 is the resolution of it width-wise, so it's 1080, or height, sorry, 1080 pixels. And you'll see the definition here, and you want to make sure that the frame rate is set to 29.97. We generally round that up to 30 frames per second. That tends to be a pretty standard frame rate here in the States. It might be different in Europe or in Asia or elsewhere. So if you're going to go back and work in those places, be sure to kind of take this with a grain of salt, that this is kind of just what America and the States use. You'll see resolution, so this again is just like what resolution do you want to load it as. You'll see time codes, so this is just saying that it starts at 0 seconds and will run for 10 seconds. And then background colors, so this is what I was talking about earlier, is that when the background is transparent, it won't show as transparent, it will instead just show as black. And now hit OK. So you'll see that it has created another composition right here in between the AI import and the PSD import, and it's black. So what we're going to do is we're going to we're going to load in all of the files from in here, and you can select them all by clicking on them and holding down Shift. Hit Command C to copy, and then you can paste them hitting Command V. And similarly, take your PSD imports, hit Shift to select all of them, hit Command C, double click, oh no, don't double click, click back into double layering and hit Command V. And I left out the background, but be sure to grab that as well. Oh, okay, so now you see that this is layered on top in this way. Again, similar to Photoshop, if you want to push it down, you could just hit Command and then left bracket. And if you look down at your layers, you'll see that it's slowly moving back. You can also hit Command, Shift, right bracket to move it back to the top, and then just drag it down in your layers. Okay, so this is the end of this video. Please be sure to look at the exercises that I have listed in the canvas and do them yourselves. And then I will start with the next video, which will be talking about the timeline. Thank you.